How's everybody doing this morning? Today we're going to answer the age-old question of how to make your website so fast it goes viral in Japan. This is a story about my website dev.to, and it was a lot of fun. It was a big adventure, and we're going to get into this right now. So let's set the scene. It's November 15th, 2017. We're doing our CodeNewbie chat ripoff called Dev Discuss. We do every Tuesday night, 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. That's 11 a.m. in Tokyo, for those counting. So I'm just kind of wrapping it up. It's about 10:30, brushing my teeth, putting on my PJs, just getting ready to sort of go to work and start the next day. Except like any sort of internet entrepreneur, I'm addicted to checking Twitter analytics, Google Analytics, all my analytics. That's my bedtime reading. So things are kind of, like normal range for like a Tuesday night at the time in November. But things start kind of growing a little bit. And this is just like all the users on right now. Like we're just not used to this many people, and it sort of just keeps growing and growing and growing. And more users, they're all online right now. It's like 10 p.m. Our core market is presumably sort of the US. It doesn't really make any sense. And over the course of 2 days when this was really kind of happening, we had about 1 million page views to the site from Japan. So, and this is all developers. This isn't just like general cat pictures. These are like actual real developers visiting the website, actually making profiles. We had about 6,000 or 7,000 new registrations in one day for our website, for developers kind of wanting to take part in the community, take part in the conversation on our website dev.to. And it really didn't make any sense. It really kind of took me back. I was shocked. We sort of dream about this kind of momentum, this kind of growth. And it all sort of came out of nowhere. Tuesday at 10 p.m., getting ready for bed. So now it's sort of time to investigate. Why are all these people showing up to this site right now? What are they doing? So interestingly, there wasn't even a lot of sort of referral traffic where we can track where it's coming from. It was a lot of direct traffic. People coming directly to the site, typing in dev.to in their browsers, and just poking around, actually using the site more than an average user, like really visiting like every nook and cranny of the whole site. It was really remarkable. So what we found out, it was really a true viral story. It wasn't just like one big news story or one like Reddit post or anything like that. It was really a lot of people, mostly on dev Twitter, kind of talking about how our website was so fast. So just sort of sharing stories. So a few influencers kind of chiming in, but mostly just like thousands and thousands and thousands of individual tweets, all about just the performance, the speed of dev.to. And we actually saw a lot of like forum posts, a lot of things like that, just like a lot of conversation. And to this day, we've sort of been snooping around the Japanese forums, and they really sort of still talk about dev.to as sort of the benchmark for performance on the web. And it's really a cultural thing. Like this is just not an amount of attention we've received anywhere stateside or really anywhere else in the world. And it's really a fascinating little bit of sort of history for our website. But so I'm sure you're asking, so what's so special about a fast website? Why would anyone care so much about the page speed of a website? Aren't all websites fast? Isn't that like just kind of what a website is? It loads like when you type in the URL. And why Japan? And that's a really interesting question. And that's kind of where we start the story. So why specifically Japan and not just somewhere in the US? Why didn't this happen in a different market? And so the big reason, and the big reason this is all important in Japan, is because the Pacific Ocean is really big. So Japan is Japan is physically very far from the US. And when we talk about the internet, when we talk about websites, we sometimes forget about how important sort of physical distance can actually be. And sometimes, I don't think we even teach this at all, just like how websites travel from one place to another. Distance matters. And as US developers, we sometimes completely disregard this because most servers and most databases and everything we use is located in the US. So we don't really feel this pain. But a lot of markets do. And a lot of markets feel it so bad that they take notice when something actually is fast. And so if they're serving their own websites from Japan, it might be performant, but a US website is typically not. So the concept here is latency. So latency is the time interval between stimulation and response. So I look up a website, I wait to sort of get a response. That's me waiting. The industry term is latency. So every trip between, say, Utah, where our data center is, and Tokyo is latency. That's time traveling between destinations. And so in order to request a website, we send TCP packets back and forth. We make handshakes. We make security checks. And each one of these is a trip all the way across the ocean. And that's a lot of distance traveled. And every time we request a JavaScript file, CSS, custom fonts, it's all just more latency, 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 latency. And what happens is that a website just hangs. It's a white screen for a while. It takes a little while to load. I'm sure you've experienced that, just like in some neighborhood in New York, you can't get service. Well, think like certain entire countries, just like service is extremely poor. And the further you are from the US, the more you feel it, because so many major websites are based in the US, and they really don't consider other markets as strongly. And really, this all boils down to the fact that you can't change the speed of light. It's the universal constraint. So we can speed up our processors, we can get more RAM, we can do all these incredible things, all these innovations. We have HTTP 2 now, we have all these new things, but we're never going to change this fundamental fact, is that the speed of light is a universal constraint. We're not doing anything about it. So let's look at the data. So the average website takes about 19 seconds to load on 3G and about 14 seconds on 4G. And people leave a website in about 3 seconds. These are kind of like, people just leave websites when they take too long. And we talk about 3G and 4G, and maybe we've moved on to LTE and bandwidths like that. But a lot of connections all over the world are just not consistent the way we think they are in the States. And we kind of, even just in certain neighborhoods, you don't get consistent connection. Well, all over the world, you just do not get consistent connections. And we sometimes do not realize that. And as developers, we sort of do a lot to hurt the situation ourselves. We don't do a lot to help. In fact, the average web page is the size of Doom. So Doom is a 1993 video game, one of the major first-person shooters. It was multi-level. It was revolutionary at its time, 3D, realistic graphics. Well, these days, just to render a web page, we send you Doom. We send all the data required to create Doom. It's over 2 megabytes just to render a simple page. And when we're talking about that, we have to send every single byte all the way across the ocean every time. It's really like, we think about these websites as like, we can do anything in the world we want. But really, it comes at a cost. And sometimes when you're sitting at your high-powered computer, your iPhone 10 or whatever, you don't really feel it, but somebody out there is feeling it. And if you don't design for the somebody out there who's feeling it, you're not making an inclusive experience. So about half the world isn't even online yet. They're not even on the internet yet, half the world. And when they do get on, they're not buying the iPhone 10, they're not buying the MacBook Pro. There's entry-level devices, there's different levels of connections, and it's possible to make a web experience that actually serves everyone in the world, but we typically don't do it. In fact, when Google made key performance adjustments to YouTube, they expected like everyone's web pages to load that much faster. They expected a lot of really big improvements. And they found that actually things were way slower, and they couldn't figure it out. They tried investigating themselves, and they found that things were so much slower because finally Africa could use YouTube. It was so slow and such a bad experience that an entire continent was just not online. And this was after YouTube was bought by Google for over $1 billion, and they still didn't even have a concept of like how an entire continent was using their platform. And really, we think of it as an opportunity. So when we can serve an actual experience that everyone can use, we don't have to sort of scramble to build new experiences, that sort of a light version of the website. If we build a fundamental version, everyone in the world can use it. We can build a global community. We can actually sort of serve everyone and do it in a simpler way. And we're a small team. In fact, it just was like me as a side project for a while. And I just felt like if we simplify things, if we really focus on performance, we can immediately serve everyone instead of just like a few people and with good computers, and then they fall off if they're ever trying to use it on their phone. So what did we do? So like, what does it actually take to make this happen? It's sort of 4 main things, and there's a lot of like little things along the way, little hiccups you're going to run into, but these are the main ones you can kind of take away. CDN, all the things. So a CDN is a content distribution network. And this is actually an infrastructure that you plug into, and you can just access it via your sort of web server. It's actually kind of like pretty simple to do. By default, you're typically going to run into most people serving JavaScript and CSS and static assets like that through a CDN. But it's actually possible to serve your entire web page through a CDN. And you actually replicate the sort of page, you cache it on the edge, so you cache it right sort of near where it's going to be. So if someone in Tokyo visits our website, they're actually going to hit a server in Tokyo that has a cached version of our page and come back right from there. So you're cutting down those like round trips all the way from Utah and back, like back and forth, all these TCP trips, and it's multiple trips for every web page. You're actually, instead of doing that, you're just straight from the same city. And as the internet grows, there's going to be CDN nodes in sort of every city in the world probably, or some sort of optimization like that. This is a map of Cloudflare CDN. There's some other products. Fastly is actually what we use. There's CloudFront. There's a million CDNs out there. It's sort of like a web host. It's a really critical part of infrastructure, and it's a really great thing to kind of leverage and kind of build in mind of. Like from the ground up, we're going to use our CDN, and we're going to treat it like part of our stack. And another thing we're talking about here is actually we want to defer and reduce render blocking latency. So the time between request and the time I actually can read and use a web page, there's actually a lot of things that have to happen. When the HTML is first sent over the wire, we get a blank white screen, and it waits until all the JavaScript is loaded, all the CSS is loaded, and potentially other sort of things like custom fonts. So like we do that because we don't want the website to flash like a plain HTML page and then sort of style up and then change when the CDN loads. It's actually a purposeful thing. You wait until all the resources have landed. But you're actually talking about like a lot of things that can go wrong between requesting an asset and it coming back. So like you're actually thinking of every time you do this, you're expecting the worst case scenario. You have to wait until the slowest resource comes back. So what we did is we made JavaScript load asynchronously. So that means we don't wait for the JavaScript. So we have to just know that like nothing that JavaScript does for our page is going to affect the user experience too much. It's kind of under the hood. We also send our CSS right as like a style tag right in the HTML. And we actually do that. That's kind of like an anti-pattern. You don't sort of typically do that. But we sort of work around to make sure that happens. So we actually send the entire sort of user experience right in that first HTML snippet, right from the edge, from that edge node. And we have the entire experience in that first request. And this is ultimately much, much faster. And what you see going on with these squiggles is sort of the first one is a trip to the server. We wait a little bit. We go for we wait a little bit for a response. We make a few more trips for CSS and JavaScript and everything. And this second little hand-drawn red squiggle is what happens when you only make one request and you actually have no render blocking latency. So let's look at that. So this is our web page. After 143 milliseconds, we have basically a fully readable site. And this is Mashable.com. After about 5 seconds, you sort of see something terrible. After about like 9 seconds, you can kind of start reading. And this kind of just goes on and on. Like this like never stops loading. Like literally, I just kind of waited. I was like, this is enough for this slide. I'm going to stop this exercise. So there's a sort of a third thing. There's a lot of modern APIs. We have service workers for creating progressive web apps. We have HTTP2, which is sort of a protocol which changes the way you can do things. WebP is an image format you can use on certain browsers that's a lot smaller and a lot easier to use. But I'd say like don't reach for these things automatically right away. Or if you do, don't think of them as like the reason your website's going to be fast. You see a lot of people talking about these brand new things as like the thing to make your websites performant finally, but the websites could have been performant all the whole time. It's actually just that we didn't care about the constraints, the latency, the actual things that make a website slow. So reach for these things if they're interesting to you and you want to kind of take your website to the next level in terms of new things you can do on the web. But don't think they're going to be the reason your website's really going to be fast. And fourth, embrace constraints. So we, as a website that wants to return in about 100 milliseconds or whatever, we can't do something that takes 2 seconds to happen. We're constrained in like what we can do and what user experience we want to bring. If we want to make our websites this fast, we can't send you Doom. So we can't load Doom if we want to create an incredibly fast experience. So there's no silver bullets, so you really have to know what you can and can't do in order to leverage your CDN and really make things fast. And finally, anytime you're talking about optimization, you have to remember that you have to write code for humans. So as software developers, you'll find out people can really optimize anything. You can make any piece of code faster if you make it like terrible. Like if you if you like say like, oh, well here we instead of using a for loop, let's like write this in assembly language. It's going to be a lot faster, but it's going to be a lot more terrible, and you're never going to be able to change it. So you have to kind of at some point take the ability to make your website faster and just do it in ways that are sort of legible and stuff. So like when we talk about like inlining our CSS right in the HTML, we do it in a way that it's actually really easy to kind of change and keep up. You could think about doing that in a really kind of hectic way, but we make sure just at the minimum it's still kind of easy to do. And yeah, so this is everything it takes to make your website go viral in Japan, to really reach a community that's not necessarily expecting a certain kind of experience. So we were able to catch on just by doing the fundamentals and doing them sort of with all our hearts. So we didn't really think of like Japan specifically when we started on this journey of creating a truly sort of exceptional experience. It was mostly just kind of, well, like anyone in the world should get a website sort of this fast. And it's really exciting to talk to our members all over the world, and just like this like is a sticking point. This is like kind of a fundamental reason they keep coming back, is they get an experience that they can really be proud of and really sort of takes their concerns into account. So thanks a lot for having me. If you want to do further reading, this book by Ilya Grigorik, it's a little advanced, but it's just like amazing on all these topics. And I would definitely look up his talks, his YouTube talks. He's a lot smarter than me and is definitely a really great teacher. I'd recommend signing up for dev.to, my website. And also this bit.ly link at the bottom if you want to take a picture of it. It's a little sign-up form because we're planning to open source our code. So if anybody wants to get into open source, we actually are planning to release our own code base to the community, and we'd love anybody to take part in that. Also, if you go to our site, we're currently running a contest, which I think is really newbie friendly. It's really fun and exciting. It's a coding contest, so I'd definitely check that out too. So that's it. So thanks so much for having me. I really hope that you all go viral in Japan.